June 1st, 1945. A B-17 flying fortress is on final approach into Bari, Italy. On board is a Brigadier General. The mission is routine. The flight is 30 minutes. And then the entire left wing catches fire. The left side of the bomb bay is burning. The co-pilot has seconds to decide whether to attempt a landing with a plane that could explode on contact with the runway, or ditch into the Mediterranean and hope everyone survives. The co-pilot was 21 years old. His name was Ralph Speck. And somehow this wasn't even the most dangerous moment of his war. This is a story almost nobody knows, and it deserves to be told. Rockport, Massachusetts. A small fishing town on the tip of Cape Ann, about 40 miles north of Boston. In the fall of 1941, Ralph Speck was 17 years old and a senior at Rockport High School. His world was small. School, the ocean, the kind of quiet life that doesn't make history books. Then December 7th, 1941, changed everything. The Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. And like millions of young American men across the country, Ralph didn't wait to be asked. He wanted in. By February 1942, just 2 months after Pearl Harbor, Ralph walked into the Army Air Corps recruiting office in Boston and sat down for the Aviation Cadet Entrance Exam. 150 questions. You needed 90 correct to pass. Ralph scored 110. He passed the physical too. But there was one problem. He was still in high school. The Army wouldn't take him until he had his diploma. So Ralph Speck went back to class, finished his senior year, and graduated on June 14th, 1942. 15 days later, on June 29th, he officially signed up as an aviation cadet. He was 18 years old, given the rank of private, and shipped to Camp Devens, Massachusetts. He had absolutely no idea what was coming. The Army Air Corps split its aviation cadets into 3 groups. Half would train as pilots, a quarter as navigators, a quarter as bombardiers. Ralph was assigned to pilots. What followed was a brutal and methodical pipeline designed to turn teenage civilians into combat aviators in less than a year. 4 consecutive training posts, 8 weeks each, no breaks. His first stop was Maxwell Field in Montgomery, Alabama. 8 weeks of pre-flight training. 4 weeks as an underclassman and 4 more weeks as an upperclassman. This was ground school. Classroom work, physical training, stress drills, and a healthy dose of harassment from the upperclassmen. Because the Army believed that if you couldn't handle being yelled at in Alabama, you had no business being shot at over Germany. Next came Bennettsville, South Carolina, a civilian flying field. This is where Ralph touched the controls of an airplane for the very first time. The plane was a Stearman PT-17, a single-engine biplane that looked like it belonged in the First World War. Ralph later said something about the PT-17 that perfectly captured its simplicity. He said it had one speed, 70 miles per hour. Takeoff, 70. Cruising, 70. Landing, still 70. You practice takeoffs, landings, basic flying, and acrobatics, all at the exact same speed. After Bennettsville, Ralph moved to Shaw Field in Sumter, South Carolina, for basic flying training. Here he graduated to the BT-13 and BT-15, low-wing monoplanes with enclosed cockpits and radios. More sophisticated, faster, harder to fly. He graduated from basic flying training as Class 43I. The I stood for September. Then came the final stage. Turner Field in Albany, Georgia. Advanced flying training. And this is where things got serious. For the first 6 weeks, Ralph flew the AT-10, a twin-engine trainer. Then something happened that set his path for the rest of the war. Ralph was one of only 6 pilots in his entire class selected to fly the AT-9, a notoriously difficult twin-engine trainer specifically designed to bridge the gap between training aircraft and actual combat planes. The AT-9 had a machine gun mounted in the nose. They flew it from Albany, Georgia, all the way down to Eglin Field in Florida and back, practicing air-to-ground gunnery runs. In October 1943, Ralph graduated from advanced flight training as a second lieutenant. He received his pilot wings. He was 20 years old. Most of his classmates were sent to fly B-17, B-24, or C-47 transports. Ralph was sent somewhere else entirely. Dodge City, Kansas. This is where Ralph met the plane that would define the first chapter of his combat career, the B-26 Marauder. The B-26 had a reputation, and it was not a good one. Early in the war, it had one of the highest accident rates of any American aircraft. Pilots called it the Widowmaker, the Flying Coffin. Some called it the Baltimore Whore, because with its short wings, it had no visible means of support. The instructors at Dodge City leaned into the fear deliberately. They used scare tactics to weed out the weak. They told the cadets that the B-26's engines were so heavy that if one engine failed during takeoff, the plane would flip over and kill everyone on board. This was completely false. It was a prank. But it was designed to break the ones who couldn't handle pressure. The ones who dropped out were quietly reassigned to fly C-47 cargo transports. Ralph didn't drop out. He was assigned to a training group of 3 student pilots per instructor. 2 men and 1 WASP, a women Air Force service pilot. 6 WASPs made it through Ralph's entire class. His instructor was Captain Cochran. Ralph later said something revealing about the B-26 Marauder. He said it was a tough plane to fly, but a lot of fun to fly. That tells you everything you need to know about the kind of pilot Ralph Speck was becoming. The planes that scared other men were the ones he enjoyed. After graduating from B-26 training at Dodge City, Ralph was assigned to the 22nd Tow Target Squadron and eventually sent to Sioux City, Iowa. He was the first pilot on a B-26 in the Tow Target Squadron, towing aerial targets so other pilots could practice shooting at them. He also began cross-training on the B-17 Flying Fortress. He said the B-17 had a slower response time than the B-26. But the switch was an easy adjustment. Then the orders came that changed everything. Ralph was told to prepare to go overseas. He was sent to Lincoln, Nebraska, for 1 week to get ready. Then he shipped out to Italy. Ralph left the Tow Target Squadron, filled an open co-pilot position, and joined the 15th Air Force at Foggia, Italy. He was assigned to the 429th Bomb Squadron, part of the legendary 2nd Bomb Group, one of the oldest bombardment units in the entire United States military. The 429th had been in the war since North Africa in 1943. By the time Ralph arrived, they were flying B-17 Flying Fortresses out of Amendola Airfield deep in southern Italy. Their missions took them north, over the Alps, and into the heart of Nazi-occupied Europe. Ralph would fly a total of 17 combat missions from Italy. His targets included Munich, Germany, Vienna, Austria, Linz, Austria, Augsburg, Germany, and multiple targets in northern Yugoslavia. And every single one of those missions flew directly over the Alps. Ralph said the Alps were terrifying, not because of enemy fighters, not because of anti-aircraft fire, but because if something went wrong over those mountains, there was absolutely nowhere to land. Just rock, ice, peaks, no emergency airfield, no flat ground. If your engines failed over the Alps, you were done. His very first combat mission was to Augsburg, Germany. Before takeoff, they were briefed with two pieces of information. First, do not drop bombs unless you can visually confirm the ground. Second, there was a known extermination camp somewhere in the area, but intelligence did not know exactly where. Think about that for a moment. These 20-year-old pilots knew they were flying near a place where human beings were being systematically murdered, and they couldn't even pinpoint it on a map. That is the fog of war in its most horrifying form. Ralph's B-17 made it to Augsburg and back. When they landed at Amendola and the ground crew came out to inspect the aircraft, they started counting holes. Holes from flak, holes from shrapnel, holes punched through the aluminum skin of the fuselage, the wings, the tail. They counted 118 holes. 118 on his very first mission. Welcome to the 15th Air Force. On many of these missions, Ralph's bomber formation was escorted by a group of African-American fighter pilots flying P-51 Mustangs. They were the Tuskegee Airmen. They were also known as the Red Tails because of the distinctive red paint on the tails of their P-51s. Their job was simple and absolutely vital. Protect the bombers from German fighters trying to shoot them down. Ralph spoke of them with deep respect. One mission stood out above all the others in Ralph's memory. The target was a bridge in northern Yugoslavia. Multiple bomber crews had already attempted to locate the bridge and failed. They couldn't find it through the cloud cover and the terrain. Pilots were giving up. Ralph's bombardier was a man named Dick Whitefield. After yet another failed pass over the target area, Whitefield turned to Ralph and said, "Give me one more chance. I will find that bridge." Ralph made one more pass. Whitefield found the bridge. They dropped their bombs, and they knocked it out. The 429th Bomb Squadron was the only squadron to successfully hit their target that day. Every other squadron returned to Amendola with their bombs still on board or dropped on empty ground. Ralph later said this was probably his claim to fame. He completed 17 of his required 25 missions before the war in Europe ended. He never made it to 25. He didn't have to. Now we return to where this story began. June 1st, 1945. The war in Europe was winding down, but the danger was not over. Ralph received special orders. He was to serve as co-pilot on a B-17, carrying Brigadier General Dean Strother from Amendola, Italy, to Casablanca and Port Lyautey in Morocco. The mission was part of something called the Green Project, the massive logistical operation to schedule aircraft and crews for their return flights back to the United States. On June 1st, the B-17 departed Amendola for a short 30-minute flight to Bari, Italy, to pick up General Strother. It was supposed to be routine. On the final approach into Bari, with the runway in sight, the entire left wing of the B-17 erupted in fire. The flames spread instantly to the left side of the bomb bay. The crew was in a burning aircraft on final approach with seconds to make a decision. Ralph and the pilot chose to land. They brought the burning B-17 down with wheels extended and made a normal touchdown on the runway at Bari. The crew evacuated the aircraft without a single injury. Not one person was hurt. But the fire was catastrophic. Base firefighters responded immediately, but could not control the blaze. Within minutes, the B-17 was completely destroyed. The investigation later concluded that the fire was most likely caused by a fuel leak from the wingtip tanks. And here is the detail that should send a chill through you. If that fuel leak had started just 1 hour later, they would not have been over a runway. They would have been flying over the open Mediterranean Sea. No runway beneath them. No emergency landing strip. Just water in every direction. They would have all died. The B-17 was eventually repaired enough to roll on the ground, but it never flew again. It spent the rest of its existence as a ground transport vehicle for the 15th Air Force, a flying fortress that would never fly again. After the crash at Bari, Ralph made an unusual career move. He traded positions to remain in Foggia, Italy, and became a test pilot at the 18th Air Depot. He was the only pilot assigned to the entire depot, which meant that whatever type of aircraft flew into that airport, regardless of make or model, Ralph had to check it out. His very first test flight was a P-51 Mustang, one of the greatest fighter planes ever built in human history. And Ralph had never flown one before. Not once. He climbed into the cockpit, started the engine, and took off with a 13-degree trim setting. It should have been 26. This caused the left wing to dip down dangerously. For the next couple of hours, he wrestled with the aircraft in the air, learning its feel, its responses, its personality, all while flying. When he finally landed safely, he decided to read the manual. Let me say that again. He read the manual after he landed. That is a combat pilot. Next came the P-38 Lightning, the twin-engine, twin-boom fighter with counter-rotating propellers. The P-38 required a 0-degree trim, completely different from the P-51. Ralph said the P-38 was the most fun airplane he ever flew. Think about what that means. A man who had flown the PT-17, the BT-13, the AT-9, the AT-10, the B-26 Marauder, the B-17 Flying Fortress, and the P-51 Mustang. And his absolute favorite was the P-38 Lightning. Then the 18th Air Depot received orders to ship out to the Philippines. They departed Italy by sea, and somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean, approaching the Panama Canal, at approximately 11 o'clock at night on August 18, 1945. An announcement came over the ship's radio. Japan had surrendered. The war was over. The orders changed immediately. All ships that had already passed through the Panama Canal were directed to proceed to East Coast ports. Ralph's ship missed the canal by just 1 day. But the captain of his ship happened to be from Boston, Massachusetts. So he pointed the bow north and sailed straight for Boston Harbor. Ralph Speck's ship was the first vessel to arrive at Boston Harbor after Japan's surrender. The kid from Rockport, Massachusetts, who had walked into a recruiting office in that very same city 3 years earlier as an 18-year-old private, came home through Boston. First, Ralph was discharged as a captain from the United States Army. He was 22 years old. Most 22-year-olds today are finishing college. By 22, Ralph Speck had already earned his wings at 20, flown B-26 Marauders that other pilots were too afraid to touch, survived 118 flak holes in his aircraft on his first combat mission, flown 17 missions over the Alps into Nazi-occupied Europe, knocked out a bridge in Yugoslavia that nobody else could find, landed a burning B-17 carrying a Brigadier General, test-flown fighter planes he had never sat in before and read the manual afterward, and sailed home on the first ship into Boston Harbor after Japan surrendered. In 1947, when the United States Air Force became its own separate branch of the military, Ralph was one of very few veterans offered the rank of captain in the brand new service. But by then he was married. He chose the Air Force Reserves instead. He settled in Sioux City, Iowa. He worked for over 40 years as a buyer for the Wigman Company. He raised 5 children with his wife, Betty. They were married for 67 years. He served 20 years in the Air Force Reserves, eventually retiring as a lieutenant colonel in 1983. Ralph M. Speck passed away on April 10, 2017. He was 93 years old. He was buried with full military honors at Memorial Park Cemetery in Sioux City, Iowa. He flew 17 missions over the Alps into the heart of Nazi-occupied Europe. He survived 118 holes punched through his aircraft on his very first combat mission. He landed a burning B-17. He knocked out a bridge that no one else could find. He flew planes he had never seen before and read the manual after landing. And when the war ended, he went home, married his sweetheart, raised a family, and went to work every single day for 40 years. As if saving the world was just something he did when he was 20. Ralph Speck was born July 24th, 1923, in Rockport, Massachusetts. He deserved to have his story told. Now it has been.